Good evening, friends, fiends, and night owl supremes. Welcome to A Bit Late, where tonight I've got a riddle for you. JK. It's a Brothers Grimm's fairy tale called The Riddle, which, semantics aside, it's not a riddle. I will give you that as a spoiler, but this story has so many twists and turns, like 3. It's pretty good. Maybe you'll guess the riddle before the story is through. I have a feeling you might. Even though it's kind of like the riddle that Baggins pulls over Gollum in the cave, a riddle that's not really a riddle. It's not very fair. Anyway, why are we talking about riddles when there's so much going on? Let's find out together. So, do get comfy, get cozy, put some tea on the boil, summon your familiars, light your fairy lights, curl up with some blankets, some fluffy pillows, and follow me into the Brothers Grimm's fairy tale, The Riddle. A king's son once had a great desire to travel through the world, so he started off, taking no one with him but one trusty servant. One day he came to a great forest, and as evening drew on, he could find no shelter and could not think where to spend the night. Oh, buddy, didn't really plan this out. Well, we don't know, that's not fair. All of a sudden, he saw a girl going towards a little house, and as he drew near, he remarked that she was both young and pretty. That's not creepy at all. He spoke to her and said, "Dear child, could I and my servant spend the night in this house?" "Oh yes," said the girl in a sad tone. "You can if you like, but I should not advise you to do so. Better not go in." "Oh, why not?" asked the king's son. The girl sighed and answered, "My stepmother deals in the magical arts, and she is not very friendly to strangers." Is her mother Gobble, I wonder? Cool. The prince guessed easily that he had fallen on a witch's house, but as by the time it was quite dark and he could go no further, and as moreover he was not at all afraid, I guess that's more important, he stepped in. And also I should say witches aren't by default bad, as we know. An old woman sat in an armchair near a fire, and as the strangers entered, she turned her red eyes on them. "Good evening," she muttered, and pretended to be quite friendly. "Won't you sit down?" I mean, they are kind of intruding in her house, and if she doesn't have space for them, I understand. She blew up the fire on which she was cooking something in a little pot, and as her daughter secretly warned the travelers to be very careful and not to eat or drink anything, as the old woman's brews were apt to be dangerous. They went to bed and slept soundly till morning. When they were ready to start and the king's son had already mounted his horse, the old woman said, "Wait a minute, I must give you a stirrup cup." I must. Whilst she went to fetch it, the king's son rode off, and the servant, who had waited to tighten his saddle girths, was alone when the witch returned. Why, you can't just leave your buddy like that, Princey Pooh, come on. Take this to your master, she said. But as she spoke, the glass cracked and the poison spurted all over the horse. That's a dead giveaway. And it was so powerful that the poor creature sank down dead? Oh no. So how logistically is he gonna get to his buddy now? I guess buddies, we don't know if they're even friends. His prince. The servant ran after his master and told him what had happened. And then, not wishing to lose the saddle as well as the horse, he went back to fetch it? When he got to the spot, he saw that a raven had perched on the carcass and was pecking at it. Oh, I'm sorry. Who knows whether we shall get anything better to eat today, said the servant. And he shot the raven and carried it off. I guess that's one way to make lemonade out of lemons. If you're not going to eat the witch's potions, eat the witch, maybe? Then they rode on all day through the forest without coming to the end. At nightfall, they reached an inn, which they entered, and the servant gave the landlord the raven to dress up for their supper. Now, as it happened, this inn was a regular resort of a band of murderers, and the old witch, too, was in the habit of frequenting it. Was this the ugly duckling? I love it. But the prince definitely did not seem to do research before heading out to see the world. He just sort of went for it. Oh, Princey. As soon as it was dark, 12 murderers arrived with the full intention of killing and robbing the strangers. Before they set to work, however, they sat down to the table, and the landlord and the old witch joined them. So the raven's not the witch, but wow, this is a mighty company. And they all ate some broth in which the flesh of the raven had been stewed down. They had hardly taken a couple spoonfuls when they all fell down dead, for the poison had passed from the horse to the raven and so into the broth. Well, there you go. So there was no one left belonging to the house but the landlord's daughter, who was a good, well-meaning girl and had taken no part in all these evil doings. She opened all the doors and showed the strangers the treasures of the robbers had gathered together, but she had no knowledge of these evil doings. But the prince bade her to keep them all for herself, as he wanted none of them, and so he rode further with his servant. After traveling about for some length of time, they reached a town where lived a lovely but most arrogant princess. She had given out that anyone who asked her a riddle which she found herself unable to guess should be her husband. But should she guess it, he must forfeit his head. High stakes, high reward fairy tales. She claimed 3 days in which to think over the riddles. There's no internet back then. But she was so clever that she invariably guessed them in a much shorter time. 9 suitors had already lost their lives when the king's son arrived, and, dazzled by her beauty, determined to risk his life in the hopes of winning her. Oh, well. So he came before her and propounded his riddle. "What is this?" he asked. "One slew none and yet killed 12. That's not fair. It could be anything, and it's like situational. Anyway, she could not think what it was. She thought and looked through all her books of riddles and puzzles, but she found nothing to help her, and she could not guess. Yeah, I know. In fact, she was at her wit's end. As she could think of no way to guess the riddle, she ordered her maid to steal at night into the prince's bedroom and to listen, for she thought he might perhaps talk aloud in his dreams and so betray the secret. So, that's a stretch, princess, but Rumpelstiltskin did sing about his ploy, and that's how everyone found out the name. But the clever servant had taken his master's place. Wow, they anticipated this move. And when the maid came, he tore off the cloak she had wrapped herself in and hunted her off with a whip. What? So he takes off her cloak and then whips her? Jeez. I feel like that's an offense somehow. On the second night, the princess sent her lady-in-waiting, hoping that she might succeed better, but the servant took away her mantle and chased her away also. Oh my god. Okay, anyway, on the third night, the king's son thought he really might feel safe, so he went to bed. But in the middle of the night, the princess herself came in, all huddled up in a misty gray mantle, and sat down near him. Though she thought he was asleep, she spoke to him, hoping he would answer her in the midst of his dreams, as many people do. But he was wide awake all the time and heard and understood everything very well. Also, side note, this is quite scandalous, the princess keeping him company at night when they're both wide awake. Then she asked, "One slew none. What is that?" And he answered, "A raven which fed on the carcass of a poisoned horse." Because, that's super common, friends. And she went on, "And yet killed 12. What is that?" "Those are the 12 murderers who ate the raven and died of it." But so did the landlord and the witch, so he's not even good at math. Whatever. As soon as she knew the riddle, she tried to slip away, but he held her mantle so tightly that she was obliged to leave it behind. Oh no, the scandal! The next morning, the princess announced that she had guessed the riddle and sent for the 12 judges, before whom she declared it. Hold up. They employ 12 judges just to hear her answer riddles properly, like spelling bee judges? It's ridiculous. Anyway, but the young man begged to be heard too, and he said, "She came by night to question me, otherwise she could never have guessed it." Yeah, because it wasn't a riddle. The judges said, "Bring us some proof." So the servant brought out the 3 cloaks, and when the judges saw the gray one, which the princess was in the habit of wearing, they said, "Let it be embroidered with gold and silver. It shall be your wedding mantle." The end. I feel like there's a lot going on in this tale, but I do hope you enjoyed it. I always like the trial of wits, and I think they try to prove something different in fairy tales, but let's be honest, that wasn't a riddle. That was not a riddle. So he should be disqualified. Anyway, let me know what you think of this story, and if you have any riddles of your own that you love that are actually riddles. Post them in the comments below. Let's have a good time with this. But now, off to sleep and dream what you will, or stay a while and enjoy another tale. Whichever you choose, I'll speak to you again, and until then, stay sleepy, my friends. Good night.